Perception is reality. That's the subject of tonight's Waters Words. There's a big problem in America that we want to address tonight. The gap between reality and people's perception of reality has become dangerously wide. So much so that people are now seeing things that just aren't there. The nation's nearing mass psychosis. People are living in an alternative universe. But this is by design. Last week, we explained how big media lies to you for profit. But there's another agenda. The Democrat media tells lies to scare you and uses that fear to control you. Millions of Americans believe a pro-Trump mob stormed the Capitol on January 6th and murdered a Capitol Hill police officer named Brian Sicknick. This was beaten into our heads through repetition.
A Capitol Hill police officer named Brian Sicknick was killed by the mob with a fire extinguisher.
They beat a Capitol police officer to death with a fire extinguisher.
Officer Brian Sicknick died after being hit in the head with a fire extinguisher during the fight.
He died at the age of 42 after he was bludgeoned with a fire extinguisher.
The truth of who murdered Officer Brian Sicknick, Trump supporters.
2 days after the Capitol siege, the New York Times ran this headline. He dreamed of being a police officer, then was killed by a pro-Trump mob. But the pro-Trump mob didn't kill anybody. Capitol Hill police officer Brian Sicknick died of natural causes. The chief medical examiner for Washington, D.C. this week ruled that Sicknick suffered a stroke a day after the riot. He was never struck in the head by a fire extinguisher. So why the lie? The initial autopsy found no blunt trauma to the head. Nobody came forward on the record to the Times or anyone else claiming the officer was killed by a fire extinguisher. Sicknick's own family begged the press to stop running the story because he called them the night of January 6th and told them he was fine. But the Democrat media needed the lie to scare you about a murderous mob of Trump supporters. Remember, without the Capitol Hill police officer, the only ones killed that day were 4 Trump supporters. Democrats in the media faked the murder of a Capitol Hill police officer and used it in the official record of President Trump's impeachment trial in the Senate. Joe Biden himself got in on the lie.
Let me begin by expressing my deep sympathy for the family of Capitol Officer Sicknick, who has died in the line of duty. The people responsible should be held accountable, and they will be.
We all recall what happened afterwards. Washington, D.C. became a militarized zone. Trump was impeached. Corporate America aligned with the Democrats, and a social media dragnet cracked down on free speech across America. Now, I'm not excusing what happened on January 6th, but the Democrats and the media hung a murder on the Republican Party. That lie tasted so sweet to the left, but the media won't pay a price for it because it was good for business. When the truth is bad for business, the media goes silent. The man who killed a Capitol Hill police officer this year wasn't a Trump supporter. He was a follower of Farrakhan. Noah Green rammed his car into police officers at the Capitol on April 2nd and was put down while charging them with a knife. Capitol Hill police officer William Evans was pronounced dead at the scene. Green was a Nation of Islam acolyte. His social media profile filled with hate. Maxine Waters, James Clyburn, President Barack Obama, all photographed getting chummy with Farrakhan. The media didn't hang a murder on Farrakhan and make the Democrats accessories. The media humanized the killer with soft profiles about his personal struggles, did no digging into Farrakhan, and the Nation of Islam, a designated hate group, still stands tall on Twitter while President Trump is banned. This brings us to the issue of racism, a concept that has become so disfigured that if you turn on the TV, it's like we're living in the pre-Civil War South.
Policing in this country is rooted deeply in racist presuppositions.
In certain parts of the country, modern policing has direct lineage to the slave patrols.
There is no one way to be black in America, but there is one way we live while black in America. We live under siege.
Now, I'm not going to sit up here as a white guy and say racism isn't an issue or doesn't exist. Of course it does. But there's a misperception that racism is everywhere, even as the facts tell a different story. In fact, America has never been less racist than it is today. Attitudes about housing, equality, mixed marriages, discrimination, hiring, language itself. These attitudes have never been more open-minded than they are in 2021. In the last 20 years, race relations have been positive, hovering around 70%, blacks and whites saying they're good. That is until around 2014, when the perception of race relations started to decline a little. This is precisely the moment social media exploded. Black Lives Matter came onto the scene, and the Ferguson effect took hold. Police officers pulling back, and inner-city crime spiking. The Democrat media plays a massive role exploiting the racial divide. The perception of race relations also started to deteriorate just at the exact same time the New York Times began identifying a person's race in their news articles. So-and-so, who is white, or so-and-so, who is black. These racial attributions at the time spiked in 2014, further undermining America's race relations. So when you hear the media sell a story about racist white police hunting down and murdering unarmed black men, it's important to look at the facts. And these are the facts the media won't want you to know. Last year, there were 50 million interactions between police and suspects, and 10 million arrests last year. Now, out of all of that, 18 unarmed black Americans were fatally shot by police, and 24 unarmed white Americans. Police have killed more unarmed whites than unarmed blacks, and that's true so far in 2021 as well. An unarmed black American who a police officer makes contact with has a 0.000036% chance of being fatally shot. A study by the Manhattan Institute shows a majority of black Americans and white liberals believe young black men are more likely to be shot dead by police than die in a traffic accident. And that couldn't be further from the truth. They're much more likely to die in a traffic accident. So, how did our perception of reality get so off base? Because the media uses racism to sell fear. A scared population can be controlled. The more the Democrat media can make black Americans fear whites, police, and Republicans, the more likely it is for black Americans to vote Democrat. And when police, Republicans, and white Americans are constantly being called racist for no reason whatsoever, that's scary. Nobody wants to be called racist. It's the worst thing you can be called in America. That freezes you with fear. You shut your mouth and you give in. That's how the Democrats divide and conquer. Make blacks afraid of whites and make whites afraid of being called racist. The media tells black Americans that Joe Biden is their savior, and anybody who opposes Joe Biden is a racist. But the biggest lie the media told about Joe Biden was that he's a moderate.
Joe Biden is who he is. He is a doddering, moderate senator from the state of Delaware.
I think that Biden himself is moderate enough.
There is often a disconnect between Biden's moderate approach and the more progressive wing of the party.
Despite President Biden's moderate tone there, it's going to be an all-out war.
Nothing to fear at all about Biden, the quiet, moderate unifier. Has there ever been a more striking disconnect between the politician's brand and his actions? President Biden has shattered spending records, proposed the biggest tax hike in decades, totally opened the border, attacked pipelines and fracking. He's forcing biological boys into girls' sports, calling America racist, and now flirting with reparations and nuking the filibuster. But the media doesn't cover Joe that way. They just say Biden is to the right of the squad, even though everybody's to the right of the squad. Being a little right of the squad doesn't make you a moderate. It just makes you a little less crazy. It's difficult for casual news viewers to see Biden clearly when the media romanticizes his mediocrity. 59% of Biden's coverage so far has been positive. A stark contrast to the coverage of Trump's first 100 days, which was 89% negative. Powerful corporate media is branding Biden as a popular moderate. And in return, Biden's taking a softer stance on China, opening our southern border to cheap labor, and sending big business hundreds of billions in fat federal infrastructure contracts so they can go green. Meanwhile, the mainstream media attacks any obstacle to Biden's second term.
Despite a ballooning crisis in his state, Florida Governor Ron DeSantis has consistently downplayed the coronavirus. And while the governor buried his head in the sand, residents throughout the state took to the beaches to celebrate the holiday weekend.
You can see that people are shoulder to shoulder. They are not social distancing.
I'm upset with the government, with Governor DeSantis for not waiting until after spring break, not wait to start opening it up.
But the media is having a hard time reconciling the science with the politics. Finally, the Washington Post forced to admit, a year into the pandemic, it's even more clear that it's safer to be outside. Dozens of studies have shown coronavirus is killed by exposure to sunlight. So why do the Democrats and the media continue to force Americans indoors? So they keep ordering packages from Amazon and watching Netflix? It keeps big business thriving, but the mom and pop shops, they stay closed. And it justifies the Democrats' emergency spending. Again, fear gives Democrats more control over your lives and the economy. Gallup found that liberals are incredibly misinformed about the dangers of coronavirus. A huge chunk of them believing that large numbers of children are dying and hospitals are overrun, which is why they've kept schools closed. That misperception allowed politicians to send billions to the teachers' unions, money that'll be sucked dry by graft. And now that people are being vaccinated, Fauci's still telling us to double mask and not eat at restaurants. And the chance of catching COVID after being jabbed is 0.01%. You have a higher chance of being struck by lightning. But Americans are still living in fear. The President of the United States now assuming control of our social lives.
To celebrate our independence from this virus on July 4th, with family and friends in small groups, we still have more to do in the months of May and June. We all need to mask up until the number of cases goes down, until everyone has a chance to get their shot.
The media has produced a simulation, an American horror story, an audience living in fear, out of touch with reality, hooked on lies, and requiring the Democrat Party to save them from racists and death. But ladies and gentlemen, it's just a movie. None of it's real. Joining us now to